So, I've talked about my spiritual and religious journey in a few other videos. I have a playlist called My Personal Journey, but I haven't really spoken much about my own journey with Christianity. So, I'd like to go all the way back to 1987 when I was baptized at my local Methodist church in my hometown in Indiana. And actually, I wasn't a baby, I was a toddler. And I remember the experience. I actually remember it vividly. I remember the pastor holding me and having water poured on my head, and everyone was watching me. It was a bit strange. This is when people would attend church. I mean, the church was packed. It was back in the late 80s. And so anyway, my family, we would attend this Methodist church, but then it was around 1990, 1991. There was a big scandal in the church. The head pastor had an affair with the secretary. And then my dad just completely stopped going to church. He refused to go. However, I think my mom had been the one who had forced him to go to begin with. But anyway, my dad just refused to go to church after that. So it was just my mom and I attending this Methodist church. But then there was another issue with a staff member my mom didn't like. And so we ended up doing some church shopping. You might know about this church shopping. I remember going to a Reformed church, went to a Lutheran church, then we went to this other, I think you would call it a charismatic church. But anyway, we ended up going to a Presbyterian church and staying there. And we went there for many years. It's just a normal Presbyterian church in my hometown, Indiana. And I remember being in church and learning about Jesus being God, praying to Jesus. Jesus is one with God. And of course, Jesus was crucified. He was crucified by the Jews and Pontius Pilate, nailed to the cross. And I remember asking my mom, because I was thinking, okay, Jesus is God. I remember asking my mom, who killed God? Who crucified God? And my mom, she obviously like misheard me. She must have thought that I said, "Who killed Jesus?" And she responded with, "Well, the Jews. The Jews killed God." And so I thought both Jesus and God were crucified together. Anyway, as I got older, I learned that it wasn't true, that it was Jesus who was crucified. But again, I never really agreed with this concept that Jesus is actually God. And so I remember getting my own Bible when I was about 12 or 13 and reading it. And of course, I'd always read Matthew as the first gospel. And a lot of people like Matthew. But obviously, if one reads Matthew, it's quite clear, it's obvious that Jesus is not God. Jesus is a prophet. Jesus is teaching about the law. He's teaching people to pray to God, not pray to himself, you know? So I struggle with this for many years, and I never really talked to my local pastor about this. I never spoke to him about this. I just kept it to myself, but I studied the Bible and I came to the conclusion that Jesus is really a prophet, that all these Christians have it wrong. But, people just like praying to him or something like that. So I continued going to church, going to that Presbyterian church until about my mid 20s. I was quite active in the church. And things kind of like faded away. And then I mentioned in another video, I became a Baha'i. I was active in the Baha'i faith. I obviously became a Baha'i because in the Baha'i faith, Jesus is a prophet. He's a manifestation of God. God is God. God is not one with any kind of prophet. And that's what I really liked about the Baha'i faith. But anyway, so about 5 years ago, I decided that I wanted to go back into the church, become active in the church, and go into ministry. Because when I was a kid at this Presbyterian church that I had mentioned, on youth Sundays, I would give sermons. This is about once a year. I did it about 3 times. I gave a sermon to the church. I really liked that. Of course, my mom liked it. She was really proud of me for doing this. I remember giving a sermon about a mustard seed. Faith is like a mustard seed, it grows in this big plant. And so I really wanted to get back in the church, but I knew I had to reconcile with my own personal belief that Jesus is a prophet, not God. Now, that actually falls in line with Islam, or the Baha'i faith. That doesn't really fit with Christianity. So I decided, you know what? I am going to study the Bible hardcore, both Old and New Testament. I'm going to study the whole thing. I'm not just going to read it. I'm going to really dig into it. But I started to think, you know what? I don't want to just read it. I want to understand how it developed. I want to look at it critically. If I'm going to go into the ministry, if I'm going to go to some kind of seminary, I need to really look at this critically. And so that's when I purchased on Amazon Bart Ehrman's book, How Man Became God, because I want to know, how did this man, prophet Jesus, become a God? And so Bart Ehrman, he explains in his book, I know it's all garbage now, but he explains um, that Jesus died, and then later on, his disciples decided to worship him as a god, which I know is all garbage. Obviously, Jews would not worship any man as God. It's all Roman propaganda, as I know now. But anyway, so I got further and further into critical research. And of course, I started reading Robert Price's work. I got one of his books, The Colossal Apostle, which is about Paul's writings and how there's actually a lot of Gnosticism hidden within the writings of Paul. And I read about Gnosticism being in the Synoptic Gospels, specifically this concept of the kingdom of heaven is actually a Gnostic concept. And so I stumbled upon Roger Parvus's work. That's Parvus, Roger Parvus's work on Simonianism, basically that the Gospel of Mark is based on a Simonian allegory. Simonians being the followers of Simon of Samaria, who is demonized as Simon Magus in the book of Acts. And so this work blew me away. I mean, his work, it's on Vridar. I'm going to provide a link. And I've mentioned it before in one of my other videos. It blew me away. And I want everyone listening to this, I want you to read it. Now, he doesn't go into the Flavian origin, but what he digs into is that this these synoptic gospels, he doesn't go in the Gospel of John, but the synoptic gospels are based on Gnostic writings. And I remember being in my office, this is about 2 years ago. I remember being in my office just yelling out loud, why would the Proto Orthodox Church remove the demiurge from these Gnostic writings? I mean, there was the Proto Orthodox Church. I think it was, I forgot which New Testament scholar came up with this term. So we have the Proto Orthodox Church, and it's the earliest writings, the Gospel of Mark is filled to the brim with Gnosticism. But why is there no demiurge? Is the demiurge hidden? I thought maybe the demiurge is hidden somewhere, but it's pretty clear that there's just one God, the Father. The Father and the Creator are together here. It doesn't make any sense. Well, I mentioned this in a video. I was a member of Myth Vision. I was a subscriber, and I was watching a video. Derek was interviewing Robert Price about Atwill's book, Caesar's Messiah. And I had heard of it before, and I didn't even want to read. I was just, this is garbage. But then Robert Price said he was blown away by Atwill's work. So I said, you know what? I want to take a look at this. So I bought on Amazon. Man, I'm telling you, Caesar's Messiah, paradigm shift. Let me tell you, 2 words, paradigm shift. Why would the demiurge be removed from Gnostic writings? Why? Well, There's only one explanation. There's only one group of people who would do it. If you've watched my other videos, you know why. The Flavians would scoop up all these Gnostic writings, Simonian most likely, remove the demiurge, and pack the synoptic gospels with this pacifist, apocalyptic Gnosticism without a demiurge. So the kingdom of heaven is going to come, and the creator, well, I guess the creator and father are one, even though the creator comes to nothing when the apocalypse comes. But then there's the father and creator are one. It doesn't make any sense, but there's a reason the Flavians did this. If you watch my videos, you'll figure out why. But again, that's my story. It all goes back to 1987 when me, as a toddler, was baptized in front of the congregation at my local Methodist church in my hometown of Indiana. Thank you for listening and thank you for subscribing. I greatly appreciate it. Have a wonderful day.